Hello, everybody. Welcome to Italy Part 2. This is, of course, Dr. Lilian Cespedes Gonzalez, your host, PhD historian, tour guide, and travel planner all across Europe. So, welcome to the second part of perhaps the hungriest talk that we've given here, which is our travel guide through the culinary history and cultural developments of Italy, the lovely country that has enamored so many people throughout the ages and now makes you hungry because why not? Well, as you know, this is the second part. If you've not seen the first part, it is here on our channel. So we're literally following the same process than the previous time. I have the list of the appetizers, all of the different meals that we're going to be exploring through the other 10 regions of Italy that we are seeing today. And then we will go region by region by looking at the food and specific locations as much as possible off the beaten path, except in a couple of places that we hope that if you ever get the chance to visit Italy, you'll be able to enjoy. And before we get started, of course, to thank for sure our very generous donors, patrons, and supporters on our PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. We are always very, very thankful for all your continuous support. And as much as we do this for free to educate the public, your monetary support is always very welcome. So the tips and donations can be sent to us via paypal.me/. Travolution Tours or our Buy Me a Coffee, which is buymeacoffee.com/Travolution. And of course, tell all your friends and family, subscribe, and all that jazz. Whichever the case, we're always very thankful for your support. So thanks for letting us talk about all of this cultural stuff that drive us quite literally crazy. So I hope you're hungry because I definitely ended up quite hungry after this. So let's dive in. And today the appetizers are the following: panzarotti from Apulia, lagane e cezzi, as well as zeppole from Calabria, artichokes, which perhaps was not what you were expecting to hear in here today, but you know I'm very much a fond person of healthy eating, so there you go. Strigonzi, tiramisu, of course, how could I not? And then lovely, lovely, lovely dumplings from the area of Trentino, acqua cotta, perhaps one of those things that seems to be a bit forgotten in the Italian repertoire and that is very much part of its cuisine, fregula, and risotto. So I hope you are ready for this. And this is, of course, just the menu. And now let's actually talk history and location, location, location. I sound like a realtor, but never mind. At the end of the day, similar situation. So we're starting at the boot of Italy, right at the bottom in the region of Puglia, as we would say it in Italian, or Apulia, as it's better known to the rest of the world. This is an area that is, of course, very popular. It's the getaway to the Adriatic and the Ionian Sea. But when it comes to cuisine and what have you not, the area of Apulia is actually uh, well known in, I guess, in many ways because of their tradition of cucina povera, which is essentially the cuisine of the poor. Ever since the Middle Ages, there was a general adoption in the area for cheaper foods because, well, due to several social, political, and economic problems, the nobility started disappearing from this region. So, those that are left behind essentially have to make do with whatever is available. So, the majority of this region is characterized by the simplicity of its food and also by lots of sagre. And sagre are these kind of like massive festivities that happen all across Italy, not just Apulia, that are all related to food, festivals, etc. Well, let's talk first about the destination that I'm suggesting for Apulia, which is no other than the actual city of Bari, which is the capital of the region and very important from the religious side of things. Now, Bari is a beautiful town. It's pretty much, well, sort of middle-sized town, about 300,000 inhabitants. History actually goes all the way back to ancient Greece. And what is, I guess, most spectacular about Bari is the old town, which is what you can see from the port in here. Of course, it also comes with beautiful sea views. And old Bari is kind of very labyrinthian. It has very much a medieval core because, well, this is an area where there was a Norman tradition. In fact, there is a castle from the 12th century, which is the Norman Swabian castle. But most important, the town of Bari is renowned for, of course, the Basilica of St. Nicholas of Bari, which is a religious site that is incredibly important both to Catholics and Orthodox alike because of the relics of the saint of Saint Nick, which many of you perhaps relate to Christmas, but I promise you it goes way beyond that. And of course, because I'm sure you can see, it's beautiful and absolutely one of a kind Romanesque art and architecture. So this is the reason why Bari is the location for our getaway in Apulia. Now, within Apulia, Bari or otherwise, you must eat panzarotti, which are essentially like mini calzone, except they are fried turnovers. These are not like done in the oven. This is just a proper, fried dish. They are savory pastry parcels, which essentially inside have kind of the same that like a pizza. So it's kind of like a fried pizza in a way. It's tomato and mozzarella, which are the most common, but you also find many places in the region that also put things like olives and anchovies, which is quite a common thing in the south of Italy or in any area that, of course, is bordering the seas. In fact, anchovies and capers is quite a common filling for the panzarotti and a few other bites like this in what is street food. So, now that we've warmed up our appetite with Apulia, let's start moving on to the next one because, as you know, we have 10 regions to cover and that's a lot. So, we're jumping just not far. We're only going to Calabria. We are just going to the other side, which is, of course, one of the regions that has a lot of renown in Italian culture because it's the getaway to Sicily. This is the area where you get across. And what we're really gonna be highlighting in Calabria is a place that perhaps may sound a bit cliche, which is Reggio Calabria. Now, this is the typical place where people kind of go for the beaches, as I'm sure you can tell from the beach hats in the picture. And I mean, if you like to, see lovely beaches, but not necessarily go where everyone else is going, well, I mean, Reggio Calabria is a place where a lot of Italians go as a general destination, but you may find less international holidayers, holiday makers sort of thing. But still, in the summer it will be very, very busy. However, the area is very beautiful. Now, the main reason why I'm sending you to Reggio. It's got nothing to do with the beach, although I'm perfectly happy if you want to spend some time in there. Most importantly is to see this. These are the Rias bronze, which are from the 5th century before Christ. These are from the Golden Age of Greece, and they are part of the magnificent collection that we have in the museum, El Museo Nazionale della Magna Grecia, which is essentially, I'm sure you gather, is the national museum dedicated to ancient Greece. At the end of the day, half of Italy was essentially a massive Greek colony, and some of the items that are best preserved that are neither in the museums in Athens or in the British Museum or in Germany are actually here. So if you can't get to both Italy and Greece, but you want to enjoy that aspect of classical culture, this is such a wonderful museum. It's very well curated, and genuinely it will blow your socks off in many ways. So definitely the area to go for this kind of history. But also a lot of people forget that Calabria is also the getaway to several of the national parks that we have in the south of Italy. Particularly, I mean, there are many, but particularly because I think perhaps it's the one that is a bit least well known in sort of international spheres. I would suggest that you go through this area to the Aspromonte. Again, beautiful mountainous scenery, little lost villages in the middle of nowhere. This is the, quintessential side of Italy that is the opposite side of, beaches full of tourists. You want to go to Reggio and do the off the beaten path kind of thing, this is what you need to do, and this is how you must enjoy it in that regards. And you're probably wondering, cool, awesome, I have the plan. What do I do now? This is something that perhaps is not the way most people imagine Italian cuisine, but this is a typical food that is traditionally eaten on St. Joseph's Day, which is the 19th of March, not just in Italy, but in many Catholic countries, Spain included. It's the day when we celebrate Father's Day, because of course St. Joseph being the earthly father of Christ. Well, this is the famous Lagane Zetzi, which is essentially known as brigand pasta. That's kind of how it translates, which is this kind of long pasta bits in a chickpea broth with garlic and oil. This is the kind of thing that it's done to share with the family, like a proper kind of soup sort of dish. Consider that, although Calabria has lovely weather, March is still can be a bit cold when the weather presents itself, particularly in the mountains. And not just that, it's of course a typical way of sharing some of those Christian values. Remember that in a lot of feast days in the Catholic Church, meat, fish, all of that stuff was kind of forbidden. So this was a way of including very nice protein and a bit more carbs in that regards. But in case that you weren't all that tempted by the first course, then don't worry because I've brought seconds, and this is the very famous cepole, which is a lovely dessert. As you can see, there is this kind of pastry, which normally has a filling, which happens to be ricotta cheese traditionally. And throughout the majority of Italy, you can find similar pastries to this, and they are normally sweet. But in Calabria is the one place where you may find them actually savory. So careful when you bite, because like I said, all around the Italian coast, often you find anchovies in places you didn't necessarily expect, and these in the area of Calabria are known for sometimes having the secret anchovy in there. However, they are very tasty, so enjoy at your discretion. Well, we're gonna now jump a little bit farther up in the Italian boot. We're going, of course, to the region of Lazio. Now, Lazio is the place that I think most people forget about because we have Rome and everything seems to be happening around Rome. And I told you already on part one that I was not going to be that person. I was not going to be taking you to, like, the big bustle. The Eternal City is one of those places that causes me such a degree of anxiety. Um, I have the uttermost respect for all of my Italian friends, particularly my dear friend and tour guide Alba Serino, which some of you may know. She's a wonderful guide and does a lot of virtual tours too. But it's Rome is crazy. So stay away from Rome, particularly this year, 2025, because guys, this is a massive celebration in Rome this year. It's a big anniversary. There is also a jubilee. It's kind of all over the place. So, if you're gonna go to the area of Lazio, stay away and go somewhere else. But that doesn't mean that Lazio doesn't have other things to offer, because that's the thing. There is, it's the second most populated region in the whole country. So by proxy, beyond Rome, there must be life somewhere else. And the thing that I'm asking you to do for your own good, for your own benefit, for your historical discovery is go to Viterbo, because Viterbo is delightful. It is essentially the best or one of the best preserved medieval towns in the whole of the country, and one of the best in Europe because it's completely kind of frozen in time. The thing about Viterbo is that it was essentially very important in the Middle Ages because it was part of the Papal States, because the papacy actually owned a big chunk of Italy back in the day, and several popes made of Viterbo their favorite residence. So it was kind of Rome away from Rome, if you see what I mean. And as a result, it's just an absolutely charming place. Well, on top of God knows how many Pope residences, you find lots of different churches, many of which have some, peculiar decorations, like the one that you're seeing right on the screen. But of course, most importantly, the Palace of the Popes in Viterbo is absolutely delightful, as well as many other palazzi. And on top of that, something that a lot of people don't expect to find in Viterbo is this. Ta-da! Thermal baths. Yes, this is an area of natural hot springs. These hot springs have actually been in use since Etruscan times. So again, we know it's a very important aspect of the culture of the area. And these are, well, the baths of Viterbo, which were used not just by the popes, but everybody in the region. It's actually very lovely. But if you want to actually use them, and there is not just this, but a few more, just be mindful that you may need to book or check in advance whether they are available or not. So keep that in mind, make the most out of your journey, and while in Lazio, this is when I'm going to suggest that you eat something that perhaps you don't often see featuring in your menu or any other menus, which is artichokes. Artichokes, when cooked right, are absolutely delicious. I say this as if I'm trying to convince you, because honestly, for the longest time, I wasn't the biggest fan of artichokes until I went to the south of Spain and Italy and actually enjoy them properly cooked in a different way. Artichokes don't necessarily go well in the north of Spain. They are not what the body needs in the cold and rain. But artichokes are genuinely delicious, and they are one of those produce that actually feature very prominently in the sort of antipesto menus of many parts of Italy, and in Lazio specifically, because well, they are particularly cultivated in the region. Now in here I propose two different versions of artichokes. You have the typical artichoke alla romana, which is what you see here on the bottom right, and these are artichokes that essentially are braised. So they normally are cooked in some sauce, or have some oil and garlic, as usual, going with them. They're very soft and they make a good accompaniment, or just something to start with if you don't want to necessarily have the typical thing. And then on the left, you have a different variant of artichokes very popular in the area of Lazio, which is artichokes alla Judea, which is historical Jewish heritage cuisine, going all the way back to the community of uh, Jewish, uh, Roman Jewish, and these are instead deep fried. So you can have, a play around with your artichokes, which see which one you like best, and then tell us about it. Because, well, I personally prefer the artichokes alla romana better. I just think that braised is better than deep fried. Something about the texture, in my opinion. But they're both very, very tasty. So let us know how those artichokes go. I know last time it was all about pizza and arancini, and now here I am. I'm sorry, but sincerely, this is another way of also staying away from stereotypes and actually engaging with local cuisine and the way that people have been eating, like I said, for a very long time. So give it a go. Well, let's take you now to the region of Umbria, which is one of those places which, once again, I had so many problems trying to decide what I was going to pick of the lovely region of Umbria. Again, one of my colleagues, Patrizia, in Italy, she tours around this area a lot because she goes to a few sites that are related with Francis of Assisi, and Perugia, of course. But I decided to go somewhere else, simply for the sake of, well, giving you a few options. However, Umbria is, again, another one of these beautiful areas of Italy. It's completely landlocked, so unlike many other parts of Italy, it has no coast. So everything is like rolling hills and mountains, charming little towns here and there. I feel that if you've not necessarily experienced that side of Italy, is one of the most accessible getaway points to nature in that regards. And well, something that is in the area of Umbria that you must see if you can is this. This is a painting, but well, it could be a photograph and you wouldn't notice the difference. This is a painting of the famous Marmore Falls, which are man-made by the Romans in the 3rd century before Christ, or before Common Era, and they are the largest man-made waterfalls in the world. They are spectacular, sincerely, like breathtaking, and so famous historically that even Lord Byron wrote about them in poems and letters. So one of those things that you need to visit. And the destination beyond the Marmore Falls, because obviously this is, let's say, just a quick stop right in your journey. The destination that I've really chosen for Umbria is instead Spoleto. Spoleto is a beautiful town, mostly medieval, has a lot of UNESCO heritage, and it's also very famous and well known for the Festival dei Due Mondi, which is one of the most important cultural festivals in Italy, which is what you're seeing here on the screen. Lots of food, lots of music, general town festivities is generally quite breathtaking, and again, a big dive into Italian culture beyond stereotypes and what mass tourism wants you to, buy into. But speaking of the UNESCO heritage and the reason why I chose Spoleto, it's actually just a very recent listing in UNESCO. The monuments that are representing Longobarд heritage. Now, Longobard is the sort of precursor to the Lombards in Italy, which are going to be part of the core foundation of how this country develops in the Middle Ages, and well, from just about the fall of Rome to the sort of halfway point of the Middle Ages. And as a result, in Spoleto specifically, we have several churches that are included in this, one of which is the what you see on the screen now is the Basilica de San Salvadore, which, as you can see, is, it's pre-Romanesque, is late Roman mixed with something else. It's really peculiar and really unique. And also this one, which is the Temple of Clitumnus. We believe it may have been a Roman temple sort of rehashed into then a Longobarд monument, but it's honestly such a beautiful area full of ancient ruins, medieval history, and just so much to offer, beyond what is perhaps a bit more mainstream. Now, when in Umbria, I really want you to look at one of these funny things that happens in food, which is that we tend to forget where food actually comes from. Now, if you're looking at this, you may be thinking, Lily, I thought we were in Italy. This looks suspiciously like the noodles that I have on my stir fry or something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, indeed. But remember, where does pasta come from? Marco Polo and a few other explorers went all the way to, the Far East to actually bring back noodles. And, well, we actually have this misconception that in Europe pasta was brought specifically by Marco Polo, but the reality is that in places like Italy, Spain, and Greece, pasta had already been part of our culture in the Mediterranean through the Arabic empires. So you find different shapes of pasta, and this is the most characteristically that links in, right, with the Far East. These are uncooked strigonzi, which, as the name suggests, are pieces of string supposed to represent sort of like shoelaces. So this is wheat pasta, which is traditionally from Umbria specifically. It's handmade, and it's often served with truffles, a meat ragu, and that kind of stuff. So again, if you want to move away from, let's say, again, spaghetti carbonara or bolognese or whatever like that, you need to go and try the local pasta specialties, because they tend to be a little bit different from what I think most of us are used to besides XYZ. So this is what Umbria has to offer for you guys. Let's move on to the the very famous destination of Veneto. Now, of course, I could have just made this all about Venice, but Veneto is full of, again, so many cities that are important. Verona, which is actually, the largest and the capital of the region, but most importantly, Padua. And I'll explain why Padua was the choice, but more importantly, let's talk about Veneto and what Veneto has mostly to offer, which is one of the most wonderful pillars of Italian food and something that I've loved since I was a little child. Tiramisu. When you go to Italy, you want to try proper tiramisu, and if you want to do that, you have to go to Veneto, which is the region where it originates from. Now, interesting fact is that we actually don't have a proper recipe for tiramisu until the 1960s, 70s. There is the thought from the point of view of food culture that we reckon maybe tiramisu evolved from another type of dish, which is a dolce torino, maybe a confectionery that came actually from Piedmont. But we are not sure, frankly, and like I said, we don't have hard evidence of a proper recipe until the 20th century. And just like we did with pizza and with a few other things, let's make it clear. Proper tiramisu, the proper traditional Veneto tiramisu, goes like this. It needs to be done with ladyfingers, this kind of spongy type of cake biscuity base, egg yolk, sugar, coffee, mascarpone, not cream, mascarpone, and cocoa powder. And in reality, a good tiramisu is not all sweet. It has a tiny bit of savory. That is how it should be done. If it's not done like that, I mean, there are some modern versions now that drench it in, amaretto or God knows what kind of alcoholic beverage. There are some variations, but a proper traditional tiramisu is like this. And in fact, you can go to many places around the area of Veneto and go on tiramisu tasting tours, finding out how the whole thing actually came together. And of course, as a cultural historian and a tour guide, I 100% encourage you to do that. Have fun. Let us know later how it went. But Now that we've eaten well, let's go to Padua. Now, Padua is a beautiful town, completely breathtaking, and most importantly, full of UNESCO heritage sites. There is two very important UNESCO locations in here, and the first one are the botanical gardens. This is, of course, an engraving from, hundreds of years ago, and that goes to show you how important this botanic garden is. In fact, it's the oldest one in the whole world. The botanic garden in Padua dates from the 14th century. This is more or less a picturesque view of how it looks nowadays. Um, and it's important because, well, as a result, it came from the university. Padua is actually home to one of the oldest universities in the world from the 13th century, and the botanical garden, which was sponsored by the university, was a way of, well, opening the world of natural science to the public. So something that botanical gardens, I think, are a place that people, some people either go to them all the time or some people don't. Particularly if you're planning to visit Italy in the summer, consider it can get really hot, very humid, and botanic gardens and green spaces like that are a way of avoiding the heat and actually staying, nice and cool, and more importantly, learning a history of a different kind, which is how we've been understanding the natural world throughout the ages. But if you are more into the UNESCO of, the classical arts and whatnot, don't worry, I got you covered. This is, of course, one of the greatest treasures that we have in Padua and perhaps of Italy altogether in terms of art history, which is the Scrovagni Chapel, which is one of the sections where we have some of the most important and best preserved paintings of no other than Giotto. And yes, it's not in Tuscany, it is in Veneto, ironically enough. So if you want to actually experience Giotto without going to Tuscany, and see the birth of Italian Renaissance and one of those things that are genuinely marking a whole generation of artists, this is the place to be. And speaking about the university, which, like I said, is so old, it's worth going in here because the university itself is beautiful, as you can see, but more importantly, it is a historical place. These are the halls and buildings that people like Galileo Galilei and Nicolas Copernicus actually studied in. Two minds that change our understanding of not just the world, but the whole universe. So, this is why I chose Padua and not Venice or Verona or anywhere else. Because of this, it's very unique and you will struggle to find this variety and this exact combination, including the tiramisu, anywhere else in Italy and maybe even the whole world. So I hope you can explore this, region from a different perspective. And not just that. There is honestly so much stuff to do in Padua, museums, art galleries, centers of entertainment, etc. It's definitely a good place to go if you have people with different interests, for sure. Well, now let's go again to one of those regions that people often forget about, but that is very interesting. This is the region of the South Tyrol, which is Trentino-Alto Adige. And it's once again one of those places where different cultures come together. This is an autonomous region of Italy where Italian and Tyrolean German traditions come together, since for the longest time this was also part of the Holy Roman Empire. So um, as a result, and because, well, I guess, there could be many ways in which we could explore this region, I very much suggest that if you properly want to understand the cultural background of Trentino-Alto Adige, you must go to Trento, in English, Trent. Well, that's because, first of all, it's a town where so many things have happened historically. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Council of Trent. This is that Trent. Well, there are different influences in the town which give it a lot of charm, and it's just very peculiar. It's one of those Italian towns that doesn't quite look Italian or feel Italian because there is so much other stuff in there, similar to when the other day we were exploring, Udine and the general region closer to, I'll say it, closer to Slovenia in Friuli and whatnot. Well, the cathedral in Trento was actually, we reckon, built on top of an old Roman basilica, which of course adds a certain layer. There is a castle from the 13th century. As you can see, the town is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. And more importantly, for those of you into sort of modern architecture and whatnot, beyond the clash of styles, which I think is very clear in here, right? We also have places like this. This is the home of the Muse, which is the museum dedicated to science, which was designed by Renzo Piano. So as you can see, this goes farther than just your day-to-day history. And it's also home, Trento is, to the oldest aviation museum in Italy. So again, for those of you perhaps into machines, engineering and whatnot, it goes beyond cars. It's not all about Alfa Romeo. There is actually a lot more in that regards, and Trento is the place to find it. But the coolest thing, in my opinion, to do in Trento and in general in the area of South Tyrol is eating, because the cuisine is so different and it's so wonderful. And in Trent specifically and in the region overall, what is prime and really homely and unique are dumplings. So many dumplings. Well, it's not just a matter of the fact that there is different cultures that feed into these cuisine traditions. You need to consider that the majority of the produce that comes, from this region is grown in the Alpine plains, which, of course, from a geographical and geological perspective, produce, they give us access to different goods that we would have in other parts of Italy, and this is also gonna, shape the way we eat in the region. For example, and something that perhaps is more familiar for a lot of people, this is the home of speck, the type of smoked ham that's become quite popular in recent years. But the dumplings, which are really unique and a big culinary deal, is what really, makes this such a wonderful experience. Now, here I have two different types of dumplings for you. On the top, the ones in the sort of plate, blue plate, are canederli, which are essentially like bread dumplings that are always presented in a rich, beefy broth. And then on the other side, the ones that look greeny, are strangolapretti, which are similar to gnocchi, and they are actually done, with potato and flour. And inside, the traditional ones have spinach and cheese, and so on and so forth. Every other town almost has their own dumpling. Every other family has their own, recipe. It's dumpling territory. So go and enjoy and experience, like I said, a very different side of Italy that I'm sure you weren't expecting to find. Well, let's go to La Toscana, because it was gonna come down at some point. As you see today, I'm kind of hitting you with some big blockbusters. But of course, in Tuscany, once again, I was not gonna take you to Florence, to Pisa, to Siena, or nowhere like that. It is indeed the home and the birth of the Italian Renaissance, and it's of course one of those places that is visited by millions of tourists every single year. But I wanted to give us a different perspective into the region of Tuscany. And that's the reason why I chose to take us to Castiglione della Pescaia. Why? Well, first things first, Castiglione della Pescaia is actually like the home to proper luxury Italian prime real estate. It actually contains the second most expensive street in the whole country. So just so you can, get that impression in your brain. But more importantly, it's one of the getaways to Etruscan culture. Now, the Etruscans are a part of many different regions of Italy, and you can explore them, in different contexts. But here you kind of have it in a nice condensed way, because Castiglione della Pescaia is essentially in the area or next to the historical center of Vetulania, which is the old site of Etruria. And as a result, there is an Etruscan museum in there, as well as the archaeological site, which includes the walls and the necropolis. So, it's kind of a condensed, packing a punch Etruscan, I guess, special, if you see what I mean. And that's why I very much recommend this region for those of you interested in this part of history. But on top of that, the area is actually very beautiful from a natural perspective. It is a seaside town, with access to, once again, natural parks like a few others, but also to specific environments that must be protected, like the Diaca Botrana, which is this swampy environment where you can see flamingos, which is not necessarily something you can see every day, and that I think it's, charming and a cool thing to do in a different environment. Well, of course, though, when we are in Tuscany, we need to talk about wine, to the point that I took this so seriously and I looked up this map of the of the different ways in which a Chianti wine is done. So in Tuscany there are two wines that are like the prime, Chianti and Montepulciano, but this is Vino Nobile Montepulciano, not to confuse with the one from Abruzzo. And these are all red wines. So Chianti is a red wine that we know has historically been cultivated since the 18th century. Again, is one of these protected heritages. But although the records go to the 18th century, we reckon perhaps is as old as the I'll say it as the Middle Ages. And then on the other hand, we have the Montepulciano, which is done with Sangiovese grape, which is what you see in here. And it is a wine that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, this time for real, and that needs to be aged for at least 2 years. So this is the area where, if you are a fan of wine, this is also a region where you can do a lot of enotourism. And in fact, in our channel, you can look out for the interview that we did with Out of the Box Florence, which is a tour guiding company that actually specializes on this specifically. So if you want to explore Tuscany in a different way, this is the way to go. But what to eat in Tuscany? Well, perhaps something quite surprising. And maybe it doesn't look like the greatest from this picture, because to be fair, some of these broths and soups are difficult to photograph in that regards. But this is aqua cotta. And aqua cotta is like a hot broth bread soup. It's peasant food once again, and it goes all the way back to antiquity. This was the kind of broth that was done to make hard or stale bread edible so that you could sustain yourself, which is kind of like an important thing in terms of historical history of cuisine in that regards. So the actual historical recipe is water, bread, onion, tomato, and olive oil. Of course, the tomatoes are later, once we actually get access to tomatoes from the New World. Before that, we think it was probably some kind of just other element, most likely garlic, which is what a lot of these recipes that then include tomato seem to have. And it's still actually very prominent in the region, aqua cotta. Um, in many ways, what you also use with this is leftover food, so it's a way of, again, ensuring that nothing goes to waste. And in modern times, there are many different versions of this. One that has become very popular in this day and age is aqua cotta done with porcini mushrooms, which is actually very tasty. It has like a very earthy sort of flavor, and it's actually very comforting in that regards. Well, we need to move to the next region altogether, which is Sardinia. As you can see, one island each time. Well, uh, Sardinia is one of those places that, I think a lot of people forget when we speak about Italy. Um, it's in many ways a place of its own right, and not in many ways. It's actually, to be fair, an autonomous region, once again, with its own language and its own culture. And in fact, Sardinian cuisine is considered a key of Mediterranean diet, and as a result is protected by UNESCO immaterial heritage. So if you want to eat well, I can at least guarantee that much. Now, I'm sure some of you may recall that a few years back, some typical Sardinian cheese got like very controversial, because actually this type of cheese, which they don't normally give to tourists, but just so you are aware, is done in such a way that it has actually live maggots, and you could get potentially some kind of food poisoning, or even some parasitic infection in your tummy, and that has actually been pretty much not censored, but essentially banned by the EU, because it's considered to be, dangerous for someone's health. So it's unlikely you will encounter this, but just be on the lookout for that. Sometimes cuisine, delicious as it is, it can be one of those things that when you don't know what you're eating, well, it may be tricky. I have found by my own experience that most people aren't terribly interested in eating a cheese that is actually being eaten alive by bugs. But in case that you're a very adventurous person, just be warned. But in any case, before I talk about food properly, I don't have a specific destination in Sardinia, because to be fair, It's a relatively small place that you can get by, with a car or even transport. You can get through the whole island fairly easily. But the most important thing you should do in terms of culture, if you want to understand Sardinia, uh, it's to see nuraghi. Nuraghi anywhere, everywhere. And actually, more about the nuraghi, I have a dear friend of mine. If she's listening this, you will be able to follow them on YouTube. If you're interested into the megalithic culture, then go to YouTube and look at megalithic hunter, and you will be able to learn a lot more about this. But Nuragic civilization remains are everywhere in Sardinia. This is, the typical Sardinian Bronze Age, which is very special, and it's all looking like this. This is actually part of one of the most important sites in Su Nuraxi, which is again UNESCO heritage. And just so you understand the importance of this thing, these are all contemporary with Mycenaean civilization. These are essentially what Nuragi are these sort of tower fortresses. Some of them we found temples, some of them we found civilian houses, but they all have this very peculiar look. And actually, the Nuragi of Sardinia, we reckon, may have been part of at least the modern legendarium and imagination of what eventually became the idea of Atlantis. So it's a very spectacular, very peculiar, and not terribly well understood part of our historical past, which definitely needs to be preserved, and that you can't explore anywhere else than in Sardinia. And when in Sardinia, since you're gonna eat and you may not want to eat the mago cheese, eat fregula. This is a very zoomed image because these are actually like 2 to 3 millimeter diameter kind of balls of dough done with semolina pasta. Um, and they date back to the Middle Ages. A lot of people think they look a little bit like couscous, and actually they are sort of similar to it. Again, we think that they were probably introduced to the region thanks to the Arabic empires and emirates that owned this part of the world for quite some time throughout the Middle Ages, up until the Normans arrived into the equation around the 11th century. So it's sort of like that, but unlike couscous, what it's normally served like in Sardinian cuisine, it's with a typical kind of tomato base and clams. So if you want to try something a little bit more peculiar, this is definitely the way to go without getting that horrible, food poisoning, and trying something that is legitimately very unique to this part of Italy, which is often forgotten, but that is actually, well, like I said, its own thing in many ways. And finally, we're closing with the region of Lombardy. And I've just realized actually that there is a typo in here. I've written it Lombardy with an N instead of an M. My apologies. I actually double checked this like 3,000 times. And it's the worst part, guys. Even when I'm doing academic papers, it's the typical thing you check with for spellings and everything 3,000 times. But you've been seeing your own writing for God knows how long. And eventually your eyes just don't gather anything. But Lombardy with an M is the region that I decided to close this because a part of the reason why I decided to put this together is to honor and to say thank you to my dear friends Andrea and Evia from Eataly Best. And I closed the previous one with Aosta region, Aosta Valley, which is an area that they go often on holiday, and they are from Lombardy, or at least, well, Andrea is from Milan, and Evia is now living in Milan. So this is my little tribute to them, and also the reason why I chose this specific destination, because we actually spoke extensively about Lombardy and what to do in my conundrum of which city do I pick in here. So Lombardy is again one of those places where you could be doing things until the end of time, and you would never have enough. But it's a very important place just for the sheer amount of culture in so many different ways. But the reason why I ended up choosing the area of Cremona, um, it's because of the UNESCO musical heritage. Nowhere else in Italy you're gonna be able to go to the home of the Stradivari family, makers of Stradivarius violins, which of course have been shaping history for hundreds of years. Not just that, even the early stages of Monteverdi happen in Cremona. And if that was all to Cremona, then fair enough. But actually, Cremona is a beautiful town full of history. The Cathedral of Cremona is actually one of the most important in North Italy. And this building coming up in here just now, the Torrazzo, is the third highest brick tower bell in all of Europe, if I remember correctly. And although this is not the greatest picture for that, it has this lovely astronomic clock. Now, it's not, like the full shebang in Prague, but it's still pretty cool. It's not like we have many of those hanging around. So, if you are not so much into music, which I suspect many of you are, there is still lots of history and culture to explore in Cremona itself. And, well, lots of food, not just in Cremona, but in the whole of Lombardy, because, well, Lombardy is home to God knows how many cheeses. Grana Padano, Lombardy, Gorgonzola, which is my favorite, Lombardy, and several others. I think specific types of mascarpone also from Lombardy. So, as you see, eat to your heart's content. But the thing that you have to eat when you eat in Lombardy, yes or yes, is risotto. Riso is king. In fact, the area of Lombardy is the largest producer of rice in the whole of Europe. It's a very, very high quality rice as well, and historically, the first recipe for risotto that we have actually goes to the 19th century. We reckon that there may have been other rice dishes beforehand, but again, the way we record these things as a society or whatever is not always on time or representative of the people. It's normally when things get popular that we start seeing these kind of recipes for everyday consumption by as many people as possible. And well, there are many, many different versions of risotto, of course. We could again be listing risotto in here until the end of time, but the most typical one, and I think perhaps the one that is a bit more accessible for people, is risotto alla milanesa, which you can eat anywhere else besides Milan. But like with everything, risotto alla milanesa is a very specific thing, not just because it looks yellow and is risotto-y, then you can call it so. No, risotto alla milanesa must have saffron, which is what actually gives it that color. Cheese, of course, like I've told you, is with all the cheeses hanging around, this should not surprise you. And more importantly, is done with beef stock and bone marrow, as well as lard. It's not batter, it's actually lard. That's the reason why, even though you may have just a couple of spoonfuls of it, it's so filling. It's not just the rice, it's the way that it's cooked. But again, consider that many parts of Lombardy are actually very cold. We are once again in the north of Italy, nearby the mountains, in an area that is not, so close to the sea. So you need hearty food to keep you warm and to keep you healthy. And on that note, that is actually the 20 regions of Italy completed in this sort of food and culture tour that we've been doing for a little while now. So this is the end of these sessions. By the way, we will be doing something similar to this in the future with some other places, particularly, of course, I'm sure you can see this coming, Spain and tapas and whatnot. But for now, this is where we say goodbye. So we hope that you've enjoyed this different way of exploring Italy. We hope that we've not made you too hungry. And if we've made you too hungry and you've gone and tried some of these things at home or in your journeys, again, let us know in the comments, what have you tried? What did you like? What did you not like? What some of these places, perhaps if you visited, what you liked about them, what surprised you, and what have you learned. It's always our pleasure to know that some of these things have had an impact in you. And if you end up using any of these to do a journey, once again, do not journey in the order that I've put the destinations. This was an attempt to do it alphabetically and with some order. Then it ended up being an absolute mess in terms of the going around the map. So this is not the most efficient way of doing a journey through Italy in any way, shape, or form. It's just, a way my crazy brain has to organize information. But on that note, thank you so much, everybody, for following this along. Thank you so much to all of our supporters, patrons, and sponsors on PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. And if nothing else, I hope that these two sessions have given a little bit of warmth, hope, and laughter into your life. I appreciate these are dark times for a lot of people. So, stay safe, stay humorous. And if nothing else, food is always the answer. We can all find refuge in food. We can always experience the world through someone else's perspective, through their food. So this is a way of bringing us together at a time where I think we need that more than ever. So I hope that helps a little bit. And take very good care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.